another official selection.
All right, everybody, welcome to the show. And we've definitely got a good one for you here tonight. We're going to be talking about, does Trump know what he's doing? Sometimes it seems like he might not, but then maybe that's the genius of his strategy. We're going to talk about this tonight with Matthew Littlefield, who is here with us. Welcome, Matthew.
Hey, Brad. It's good to be with you again, mate.
Matthew is pastor of New Beith Baptist in Queensland, Australia. He's been there we're getting close to 10 years. And been in vocational ministry for 14 years altogether. Masters of Arts in Theology with a focus in church history and the early Enlightenment. So we've got a good source here. And we're going to come at this position, we're going to come at this topic from slightly different positions. So this is not a debate, but a discussion, I think. And one of the things that I told Matthew I was interested in doing was, because it's pretty hard to find today where you can disagree on maybe a core principle of the current administration and do so without it becoming a dumpster fire. And we're both Christians, and I think Matthew agrees. We'd always like to honor God with our speech and the way we go about things. So, Matthew, what do you think? Do you think we need more reasonable discourse about these things?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, on my own YouTube channel in the last couple of weeks, I've had a couple of discussions with different sides of the abortion debate here in Australia. I interviewed one of the leaders of a group called Abolish Abortion Australia, which is sort of influenced by the abolitionist abortion movement in the United States. And I also interviewed one of the the head of Answers in Genesis in Australia, Mike Foster, who is a very avid pro-lifer. And I got them to come on and explain the differences of their opinion, their positions. And part of the reason I did debate is because I actually didn't even realize that there was a split in the pro-life movement. I always just thought pro-life and abolition were the same thing. I always thought the goal of pro-life was abolition. And I do know some pro-lifers who do believe that to be the case, but I found out there's this big disagreement in the movement. So I really wanted to get to the core of it. And my summation after doing it is I actually lean myself towards the abolitionist perspective. But I feel like both sides are kind of attacking each other unnecessarily because they're seeking to bind each other's conscience, and it's not necessary. Some people believe that we should just put forward abolitionist bills which demand abolition now, no compromise. And others believe, well, we can use a strategy of incrementally moving towards a more just society. And I think that a biblical argument and biblical precedents can be argued for both positions. And so I actually have a lot of fun getting into discussions where I don't necessarily agree with people. And I think it can be done very well. And I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, that can be a contentious one. And that's what you're describing is very interesting, because that would be mostly an intramural debate among Christians. And I guess maybe many people don't quite know about that. The abolitionist movement is for abolishing abortion altogether. And tell me if well, the way I understand it is looking to hold at least doctors accountable if they are abortionists, I guess is how they would refer to them. Holding them accountable, legally accountable for that. Is that one of the issues that you're dealing with?
Yeah. It's basically the idea of, they argue, equal protection under the law. In other words, to have any law which allows the slaying of an innocent child is unjust. So their view is we should prosecute all involved, and the level of prosecution can change depending on the culpability of guilt. You know, some might consider doctors more guilty, some might consider mothers. There's a bit of a debate there. But the whole point is they believe that to put forward a bill which says it's okay to abort children under a certain age, but not over a certain age in the womb, is inherently unjust. And so they don't just oppose abortion, they oppose the pro-life movement in some ways because they believe it's compromised. And And some of their arguments are actually valid. And I've actually seen some of my friends in the pro-life movement actually start to change their tactics a little bit because they've taken on board some of the criticisms, which I think is a good thing. Yeah. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I was at a mate's barbecue, and one of my friends who's very prominent in political activist spaces as a Christian, not as a politician, but as a Christian activist, he organizes conferences in Australia. It's actually called Church and State. You can check it out online. He's really wise Christian. He's a good friend of mine. We had a debate with a couple of the abolitionist perspectives at a barbecue, and it was actually really awesome discussion, because there is definitely a sense in Australia that there is a movement rising, and I think having these kinds of discussions is important. And we won't necessarily always agree on strategy, but we don't have to separate over disagreements, in my view.
That's really interesting, because that's a really good segue into what we're going to talk about here tonight, because, you know, we have been very, as you're aware, we've been very supportive of the Trump administration, not the whole time, but definitely since we've understood more about what their stated goals are, and watching some of their actions around the world, particularly as they go and take the administration into places like, well, the United Nations and Davos, and even into Bilderberg. And we don't know what they talked about in Bilderberg, but we did have representatives. I think Jameson Greer went there to Bilderberg from their administration, and one of the criticisms we caught for that was, well, there you go, the administration is going to Bilderberg. But why wouldn't we assume that they went to Bilderberg for exactly the same reason they went to Davos and the Munich Security Conference back in February? So we don't know what happened there, but our position is we believe the president has, deserves some time, the benefit of the doubt. But we will criticize, unlike some of the staunch Trump supporters, we will criticize the administration when we see it doing things that we don't particularly agree with. And our channel has plenty of that on it. The Substack, where Summer does 95% of the writing there. So to give her credit for that, she recently was critical of Marco Rubio for making comments that seemed to make it sound like that America was really established, by or equally by Roman Catholics. And at the founding, anyway, it wasn't the case. But anyway, the point is kind of like what you're talking about there with the pro-life and the abolitionist side. I think as Christians, we need to be able to talk about these things thoughtfully, firmly, but always grounded in truth. But at the end of the day, we're a family. We're on the same team, and we know how it's going to all end anyway. But I'll start out. I'll just see if I can get us started with this. I showed you a second ago Matthew's article, the one that we'll be reading through this as we go. Does Trump understand this? And I'll read the this one doesn't. Yeah, this one doesn't give your subtitle, but I'll read it. Trump's policies toward Iran are accelerating the very fracturing of the world trade system that many of his supporters argue he was seeking to protect. Matthew is a little more skeptical about what he's seeing than Summer and myself are. But I'll start it off like this. This is what I was saying to Alex Newman when I was on with him, and he's also he and the New American and Liberty Sentinel, New American Magazine and Liberty Sentinel, they've been around for a long time, and they're always warning people, particularly Christians, about the rise of globalism and threats of technocracy and things like this. But recently, they've also been very skeptical about what the Trump administration is up to. So what I said to him was this: many conservatives and Christians who were rightly skeptical of government overreach after 9/11 are now looking at the Trump administration's actions in places like Venezuela and Iran and in other things. What we believe is through an old lens, evaluating it as though Trump is operating in support of the liberal international order, which really began after World War II. And we'll get into more of that tonight because Matthew talks about that in his article. But what we believe is that lens doesn't fit the current evidence. What we're seeing today, we believe, is not a continuation of Bush, Clinton, Obama era model of global management and endless nation building. And we think that the public record shows something fundamentally different, particularly as we promote on this channel a lot the national security strategy, which rejects the idea that America must manage the entire world or spread democracy everywhere. Instead, it emphasizes sovereignty, not only for the United States, but it's promoting sovereignty in our own region and nations that are peripheral to our national interests. Peace through strength is a common theme. We need to project strength, particularly three ideas that you find in there. They're not mentioned in name, but the concepts are there: prosperity, prestige, and peace. Prosperity meaning that rebuilding and strengthening the middle class after 50 years of deindustrialization, return the nation's wealth to the people, secure market access, particularly in the Western Hemisphere for Americans and American businesses. Prestige just means to project stability and power. And particularly the national security strategy says decency, project decency and goodness to the world, avoiding signaling weakness. The idea being that if your allies respect you and your enemies fear you, that's a good thing. That's how you avoid internal conflict, indecisiveness, pointless wars. It's how you can reverse contempt. And America has been seen with an air of contempt for quite a while now. And the third one, peace, means, which might seem like a contradiction today, and we'll talk about that. Peace meaning safety of American citizens and our national security, our borders comes first. Then we want to keep the region stable. We want to prevent World War III. Applying just war theory. Judge all foreign commitments by risk-reward assessment and not ideological commitments. So we see the shift in not only in the language but in some concrete actions. The administration has withdrawn the U.S. from dozens, 66 to this point, multilateral institutions and treaties, including the United Nations Population Fund, which was a depopulation fund, World Health Organization, and others. And the reason they haven't withdrawn from the United Nations is because that was an institution that the United States played a key role in founding. And the administration says in the strategy they'd like to reform it, if possible, so that it advocates in our best interest as well. So those are just a few things, and we'll get into more of these as we go. But how would you just give I'm not really an opening statement, but just sort of what you think, how you would respond to that, and just give me your idea of what you're seeing and what you think is problematic, just briefly, and then we'll get into your article.
Yeah, so I don't fully disagree with your summation, and I think we've talked about that a little bit. I actually love the national security agreement statement that they put out.
Sounds great.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of awesome stuff in there. It might not be perfect, but it's a massive step up from the direction the United States has been taking for some time now, and that's good for the American people. I think Americans are right to want their nation to focus on them first. I think the rest of the world has been very selfish about the way it's taken advantage of the United States. So nothing that I say in my position is anti-America at all. I actually am a big supporter of that agreement, and some of the stuff that Trump has done is actually fantastic. The removal from those international agreements, especially the WF and stuff like that, I wish my country would do that, but I happen to live in like a little nexus of globalism. Australia seems to want to pretend that it's part of the European Union or something. I mean, even our cars, like Europe is a densely populated, massive population area, something like 300 million people or something like that. And Australia is a massive continent with a very small population, and yet they force on us the same kind of car emission standards as they expect in Europe, even though it's ridiculous here. I mean, without diesel in Australia being cheap and accessible, our entire economy is in trouble. But they're trying to actually phase it out in this country, and we don't really have a replacement for it. That's just one microcosm of an example of how I live in a nation which has leaders who are too quick to get on board with globalist agendas. So I'm a big supporter of the United States government having removed itself from those things. I guess the difference in my analysis, to summarize my position, is I see what's happening in the United States happens in every global empire. And by empire, what I mean by that is a nation which rules or has dominion over other nations. It might not have complete control, but it has at least dominance and power and a degree of influence. Is what happens is when a nation rises to that level of power and prominence, it sucks into the center of power, representative from all of the nations with which it has influence and all of the nations with which it wants to have influence. And then they vie for power in the centers of power, which is what we see in the United States at Washington. So the same thing happened in the British Empire, the same thing happened in the French Empire, the same thing happened in Russian Empire, same thing happened going back to the Roman, going back into ancient times. And what I see, I believe there's an element of what you're talking about, which is at work in the United States strategy, but I also see there's influences coming from other nations which are seeking to direct the resources of the United States to their own benefit. And I see in Trump's administration, I see signs of what you're talking about, and I don't discount your perspective at all. I actually think I do see signs of that, and you've given clear evidence of that. But I also see signs of the influence of neocons. I see the influence of the industrial complex. I see the influence of international financing. I see the influence of all these other things. And it's like there's this multifaceted tug of war which is going on. And that's why I wrote that article, Does Trump Understand This? I didn't really go into a lot of detail in that aspect of it in the article, but what I was just trying to point out is even if Trump's strategy in Iran was in line with the American strategic goals, I think it's actually undermined those goals on an international level, because Iran was set up specifically to be resistant to the kind of influences which the United States is used to using to take down other nations across the world. And when I say the US, I mean the Washington establishment, which has used it in that way. So I would say that what I see as a summary of my position is this multi-pronged influence on the center of power, which is Washington. And I see there's good elements in that, the American first elements, which I support. If America were to withdraw itself from all of its international obligations and just say, we're going to focus on ourselves completely for the next 100 years, I wouldn't complain, because I think a nation has a right to do that. I'm not saying they have to do that. I'm not saying they have to. I'm just saying I like that. When I read that national security agreement, I was like, this is fantastic. This shows that there are people involved in power in the United States who know what's gone wrong and how to fix it. They understand the downside of imperial overreach and imperial influence. And that's what brought the United Kingdom down. I mean, look at the UK today. It is a shell of its former self.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a bit of a summary. Maybe I haven't been super clear there in my summary, but that's how I would explain the situation.
Well, I'm going to make sure you get plenty of an opportunity to expand on that as much as you want to. Okay, so the first thing that I'm hearing from you, and that you mentioned in the article as well. Let me get that up here so people can see that too. There we go. Was that maybe clarify a little bit more about what you're saying when you say that These signs of empire, what I guess the way I would set it up is the old lens assumed America was trying to manage the entire world, and the published policy positions of the administration, and then as I described some of the actions, and I'll describe a lot more of those as we go tonight. The objective case for gains that have been made toward restoring the democracy, or restoring our republic, excuse me. And I would say the current doctrine is about restoring just that, national sovereignty, and pursuing limited objectives. Now, that can't happen immediately. So it's going to require some work, some stabilization. It's going to require, in our opinion, the finishing off. You mentioned in your article, you acknowledge the presence of the force of the free trade monster in the world, which we would argue comes up out of the old ancient structure of the City of London. Today, it's more of an ideology that spread around the world and was in the United States during that 50-year period since World War II and the establishment of the liberal and national order after the Soviet Union fell. That doctrine was strong here too, with the policies of controlled disintegration and managed decline, which was a distinct policy statement by the Council on Foreign Relations and members of the Trilateral Commission, who were members of the CFR as well, in 1973, and it became official American policy under Jimmy Carter in 1979, and then. We talked about this on the channel here as early as 1982. You saw, Billy Joel writing songs about it, about Allentown, where the steel industry had gone and people were suffering. So, kind of like to look at that too. What are our artists and our musicians writing about throughout time? The good ones anyway. And so you can see that had an effect. And anyone who's lived in the United States over that period of time has felt that as well. Deindustrialization, job loss. It's difficult. You graduate from college and you don't know whether you're going to get a job in the field you've studied, or what you might have to do to survive and make a living. The administration has clearly identified that and is working to reestablish that. But before that can be the primary goal, we have to stop the influence that's coming in from globalization. We have to stop that influence, the influence of free trade policies, the idea of people who want no tariffs, and tariffs being a main objective of this administration for the purpose of reshoring our industry. And remember, it was prosperity, or prestige, prosperity, and peace, and that prosperity part, that's where that comes into play. So you mentioned here that, and you said, and it's in your article too. Talk to me about the what you're seeing that makes you fearful or suspicious that there's more of the same, or particularly I want to hear more about what you mean about empire when you say that it looks like there's more of that urge for empire that's showing up here, because I'm interested in that, and I saw what you wrote in the article. It might be better if people just have you explain it here.
Yeah, so this is a really complicated topic. So I'll start off first by saying the reindustrialization in the United States is a necessity. It is a necessity for the good of the Americans and for you guys, and it is a necessity for the good of the world. And it's one of the reasons why when Trump brought out the tariffs very early in this current administration, I was celebrating that. I mean, we've been raised in the West to see tariffs as a bad thing. It's because we have been propagandized to see free trade as the thing which has lifted up the wealth of the world. But really, wealth has been trajecting up since at least the Renaissance. And it is really actually a result of many multiple different factors, and you've got the recognition of the rights of man, which comes out of the medieval scholastic movement. You've got all these different things. I won't go into detail about that because I don't want to make my answer too long. But we've been propagandized to see free trade as the way to do things. But what free trade does is it allows predatory capitalists, and what I mean by that is, I mean financial capitalism, financializers, the people we confuse as capitalism, but then I don't see them as true capitalism, because true capitalism is about you produce, you create excess, then you take that excess capital and you put it back into production to increase your production so that you become more efficient, and you build on that. And that's basically what you guys call the Hamiltonian system, which is this idea that you have a strong industrial base, but you put your capital back into your society to improve your society. Whereas financialization, which has really been enabled by free trade and the reduction of tariff barriers around the world in the 20th century, what it does is it allows these predatory financial class, the wealthy class, to basically parasitize any economy they want to. So they can move into any aspect of the global economy, and they can use their money to basically use strategies like investing strategies, gambling strategies, and stuff like this to crush local industry.
Exactly, yeah.
Make money for themselves. So I stand in 100% agreement with you that is wrong. And it is.
We've talked about that too here, right? You have a book.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's right here in front of me. About this.
Like a roaring lion.
Like a roaring lion, yeah. Which is really about how Satan tries to destroy you through different things, conspiracy theories. And one of them was free trade. We were really impressed by that article you wrote, and then the chapter, which we talked about in one of our last shows together. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's you've done a great job on dealing with free trade.
Yeah, so on that, when Trump brought in these policies, I'm like, wow, this is good. This is actually really good. And like, I follow a wide range of different voices. And this might seem like really a random one, but there's one particular gaming YouTuber I follow who's actually sort of in the financial, he's not really in the development side, he's in the financial side. And he's just one example, but there was these people who were just avidly against Trump. This guy was not a fan of, and he's been basically lobbying gamers through his YouTube channel. He's actually a powerful financier, to basically say, you need to be calling your representatives and saying, we need to get rid of these tariffs. This is why you're paying more for consoles. It's why you're paying more for this. Why? In other words, he's pushing the classic propaganda, but this has been happening in different spheres of society. And we've even seen the Supreme Court come out and stop some of these tariffs because the Supreme Court generally leans to the right, but the right is a big supporter of free trade. So there's been a lot of antagonism against Trump for this, but essentially what he's doing is he's doing what ancient China did with the Mongols. They put up a wall to stop the Mongols from being able to just come in and raid everything whenever they wanted. That's why they built, or not just the Mongols, but basically the steppe warriors of the Asian steppes. They built this wall to stop these raiding parties from just being able to come in at will. They had this barrier put up so they could protect themselves. That is what tariffs do. It is a good thing. So there was a whole bunch of policies which Trump came up with, but before he was even elected, I noticed that he was funded heavily by people like the Adelsons. He was funded heavily by like the Ellisons. He was funded heavily by these different groups who wanted to make sure that the American administration was making promises about things around the world that they would devote resources to. And the way that I kind of see it is, you've got this tug of war between this America First element in the administration, which is saying we need to prioritize our country. But then there is this foreign influence which comes from multiple different nations. It's not just one. Some people want to pick on one particular nation, but it's actually multiple different nations. This is a common thing which happens in empires. You can read about this if you read about Byzantium. If you read about ancient Rome, you'll see how the foreign influences come in and they're like, okay, you can have what you want for your little area here, but we want to make sure that your armies are ready to help us with this effort over here. And they will put money into that to sort of direct the efforts of the resources. And I would argue that's more what's going on with Iran than necessarily trying to take down the City of London. Although I understand that the City of London has financial assets around the world, I see there's like this multi-pronged influence which is going on here. And the way I kind of look at it, and I'm a nationalist, right? I believe that nations should submit to Christ. I believe that nations should focus on each other. People can debate over exactly how to express their nationalism in a country. I understand that. But at the end of the day, what I really believe is that nations should elect governments to serve themselves, not foreigners. And I see the way my nation, like resources in my nation, are lobbied by foreign interest groups to support causes around the world. And it frustrates me. But in America, it happens on a much heavier scale. And I see that influence going on. And it's my instinct, because of my position on nationalism, to critique that and say, well, this isn't good because it robs the American people. My nation doing it robs the Australian people. I mean, for example, in Australia, this is going to seem like a small thing compared to what we're talking about here. But I'm a rugby league fan. Do you know what rugby league is?
I'm familiar. Somewhat.
Yeah.
I used to watch Australian rules football when it was on ESPN many years ago. That was one of my favorite things, but not rugby league, I guess.
Yeah, rugby league's a bit different. But anyway,
Yeah.
the Australian government made a deal with Papua New Guinea. I think it was for $600 million, to send $600 million to Papua New Guinea to build infrastructure for football stadiums, a football team. And they've even, apparently, according to the deal, they've made a deal, right, where Australian rugby league players can sign to play for the Papua New Guinean team, and they don't have to pay any tax. So the best player, look, our league is so small in comparison. Like the best player might get paid $1.4 million. In Australia, 50% of that is tax. If he plays for Papua New Guinea, he gets to take it all home. But my point is, what's happening is these foreign interest groups, and sometimes localized interest groups, who have this particular industry they want to expand, they lobby the center of power and they redirect resources outside the actual nation for the benefit of other nations. And I just think that's immoral. I think it's immoral at the core, and I see that happening with the United States in multiple different ways. And so that's kind of what I'm critiquing in my writings.
Okay. I guess let's those are big points. So let's start with this part of the article. I'll share it up here on the screen so that there we go. Because I think we'll get into this here, but we'll start out with Iran. You start out talking about the operation in Venezuela. And then move to Iran and describing a bit of that. But let's go to Iran, being a much harder nut to crack. You mentioned the ancient nature of their society, the fact that for decades now they have forged a relatively successful economy under sanctions. Obviously, their leadership is a bit difficult to deal with, and as you write here, it makes them more impervious to outside pressure. And the distance from the U.S. to the Middle East, Iran's placement in the world trade system, and its ability to turn around and put sanctions on much of the world in response to attacks. In other words, controlling the choke points. This is one of those deals where we would argue that there's an influence behind that's not just Iran, but that gets into a little more meta than we probably will get into tonight. Maybe we will, but we'll see. But let's deal with this. And the United States' intricate relationship with Israel. Now, as you know, where we are, the daily narrative here is just all over the place. And what you mentioned before, where you saw some of those urges in the Trump administration. Yeah, to tell the truth about what we see here, it's really as though Trump himself has no party. And much of his cabinet is the same way, because he's having to battle against obviously the left, but then also within the Republican Party there are, as you've identified, quite a few holdovers from the post-Cold War consensus, we would call it, I guess. Those who are want to continue with global governance institutions and the rules-based international order. So I see that as well. You say that the relationship with Iran, you suspect this relationship is being strained by the conflict, and other various factors make the situation harder to handle. But there's also one other very significant reason why Iran is a much harder nut to crack, a much bigger problem to solve. And this is the probably the claim I want to deal with here. We're saying that Trump's policies toward Iran, this was in the opening statement too, are accelerating the very fracturing of the world trade system that many of his supporters argue he was seeking to protect with this war. Now, you do describe this in the article, and you go on to mention some of the issues that we brought up. But why don't you expand on that just a little bit? Let's talk about that for a few minutes, because that was something I thought was interesting. I thought I might want to respond to as well.
Yeah, so I guess I could have gone into more detail there, but what I'm arguing there is that basically the basis of the world trade system right now is the SWIFT system. Basically, all the money transfers which we make are based on the SWIFT system, which is a US-dominated system, and it's heavily influenced by the petrodollar, which has enabled the US to have the most powerful economy in the world. People trade in US dollars, and so there are those who are arguing that the US is both seeking to strengthen the US dollar and preserve the US dollar through what it's doing in Iran. And I'm arguing, and I didn't go into heaps of, I tried to write a shorter article, so I didn't go into a lot of detail on what I meant by this. So I'm glad you're asking for clarification.
Yeah.
What I mean by this is, by seeking to use the US's great advantage over every other country is its blue water navy. It's the only country with the amount of aircraft carriers that it has, with the kind of projection that it has. I do not believe it has the most powerful military in the world. I actually think if you were to, I think China would have surpassed it by now, at least on land. But on the sea, US still has the best ability to project. And because of this, it's really been able to control the trade routes. And for quite some time, in fact, for centuries, whoever controlled the trade routes in the world really dominated the system. Before the US, which became the hegemon, the world power in the 1990s, you had a bit of a competition between it and the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union was never as powerful on the sea as the US. And before that, you had the British imperial system, where they controlled the seas. There was a bit of competition in the 19th century, early 19th century, between the English and the French. The French were a lot more powerful in the 18th century. But you go back for centuries, and these European powers, because of their advanced navies, controlled world trade and had a big influence over world trade. I mean, it's very famous in Australia. I don't know how famous this is to you Americans, but there's a famous situation where the British gunboats sailed up through China and basically used their naval power to take control of the opium trade. And the Chinese were trying to stop what the British were doing. The Brits were able to use their navies and just dominate them. Because of that advantage, it appears to me, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but it appears to me Trump is seeking to use that naval advantage to kind of hem Iran in and sort of take away their power to hold the rest of the world's resource allocations hostage by shutting down that Strait of Hormuz. But what's happened is, because of Iran's place in the Eurasian continent, multiple different countries are now building land routes. In fact, China had already done this before July 2025. They'd already finished one of their major train lines, or several train lines. What's happening is world trade is now starting to go back to the way it was in the past. If you go back sort of even more ancient, past the rise of the European continental colonial powers, if you go back before that, world trade was dominated by those who controlled the land routes between Asia and Europe. And what we're seeing is this US strategy of bringing in the aircraft carriers, using air power to sort of break a nation or to bring it back under control, which it did in Venezuela. Like, whether you agree, whether people think what happened in Venezuela was moral or immoral, it doesn't matter what they think morality-wise. No one can argue that wasn't effective. It actually worked. I mean, some of the things you said at the start are also vindicated by what happened in Venezuela. There was no desire to try and institute democracy. There was no desire to seek to land troops and seek to try and make a nation build like what what Bush did in Iraq foolishly. There was no effort to try and do that. They just simply went in, they arrested Maduro, taking him to New York, put him under charges, and now the Venezuelan government is a lot more nervous about disagreeing with the United States because of what happened there. And now the oil which Venezuela is producing is much more open to US investment, and those ships are starting to flow to places where it wouldn't flow before, and they've actually stopped the flow to some places where it was going before. So we see that naval power, that's American advantage, but it's hit a massive roadblock in Iran for the very simple reason of the place where Iran is situated. Firstly, the strait is so narrow that with their missile technology, they're actually able to counter to some degree the sea power which they're up against, but also because of its land connection to some of the most major powers in the world, it's able to bypass sea trade completely. And so what this is doing is it's actually weakening the dollar system, weakening the SWIFT system, and actually accelerating the revival of the ancient land bridges, sort of like the old Silk Road. Some people might know about the Silk Road, which existed in history and made China, and a lot of people don't realize this, but China was like the most powerful, wealthy nation in the world for centuries because it controlled the Silk Road, these silk trades. And even though you got Europe going on and you got the Middle East going on, really China is off in the background. Unless it's been invaded by the steppe warriors, Mongols or Huns or whatever, it's actually managing to maintain quite a dominant control over trade. And so what we see happening is this sort of re-emphasis back on land trade. So that's what I'm kind of arguing about there.
Okay, let me. I think I can. I saw where or Summer showed me that you guys were discussing this at the under your article, and I looked into it a little bit more. I don't want to come here and make out like I knew all this ahead of time, but thinking about the critique that she offered, that she said that it sounds like a. I'll just read you the note I wrote here. It seems like an interpretation of the world through a British geopolitical framework, which is understandable given what we've seen for 50 years. But the strategy in Iran, well, as stated in the national security strategy, is very different. You would have to assume that what Trump is doing is operating on the classic British geopolitical framework. And what we're arguing and what we think we're witnessing is, I don't want to say the opposite of that. The idea has been, or what we've always been taught, is that the two competing systems in the world are communism and capitalism. And it appears that there's another system that has been sort of overlooked, obfuscated in our country, has been kept out of academia, which is that American system that you mentioned, which is really, to summarize, Hamiltonian system, American system of economy and political economy, several names, but the idea being just what you find in the national security strategy. It is that we need to be able to produce everything we need to feed ourselves, to defend ourselves, and to be prosperous. First of all, as a people, and then on a global stage.
Yeah, so, can I just...
Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
I just want to speak to that. Michael Hudson would call it industrial capitalism as opposed to financialized capitalism. And that's definitely a side effect of the Iran war. And it's why I didn't realize it was Summer who wrote that, but I haven't had a chance to respond in more detail. But I figured because we're doing the discussion, we could talk about it in here. But I actually think whether or not that is actually Trump's strategy with Iran, I think it is going to be a net result of this. Like, the idea that a country needs to be able to make what it can produce itself and be self-reliant is just so basically wise. It's actually crazy to think that we got away from it. I just wanted to say that, so you keep going.
No, that's a good point, because that's really, I think, where that's where the rubber meets the road in what we're talking about here, because the evidence is, as we see it, that the effort of the administration is legitimately a return to, it's not to bring anything, not to bring down our system. A lot of people say Trump is destroying the Constitution because the tech bros want to come in and establish a CEO monarchy or something like that. But there is a goal in mind, and it is a make America great again, implies that there's something to return to. And that thing that is being returned to is, well, it's found in the Monroe Doctrine. It's mentioned here in the strategy as well, which is really just securing our security first, and then of the Western Hemisphere, to work with these nations, to encourage their own sovereignty, to make them trade partners. So America was founded historically in opposition to the British free trade model, which is really what we identify today as the globalist system. It's grown into an ideology through great wealth and power and influence and financialization of all the world's economies, basically, so that markets control value so that it can be manipulated. That might sound a little cynical, but there's a better academic argument behind that than the one I just gave. But this American system
fair.
Well, maybe so. The American system of political economy, productive industry, national sovereignty, infrastructure development, protection of domestic manufacturing, all of this can't be secured until the meddling from the outside is cured first. And what Iran represents is one of the key pieces on the chessboard of that, because as our argument is, and it's not our argument, we're drawing this from historical evidence that we've been able to find and some good research by some folks that we've been checking up on, is that the free trade model, as we've said over and over here, is the thing that the founders responded to, objected to, wanted independence from, and that is the model that Trump is working back toward. So let's actually move on in your article, because I think you talk about this a little more, and this might open it up a bit more, because you go into, let's see, let me get. By the way, Summer is not with us tonight, and so I am flying confused. I'm on I'm on instruments only tonight, so it's just so everybody understand.
It's all good.
Yeah.
No, I'm enjoying this discussion. This is good. And look, just while you're looking for that, so the idea of industrial capitalism, to explain to people who are listening, is it's similar. It's basically an adaptation of what I talked about before. But in industrial capitalism, the government actually does input into the economy, but what they do is they input infrastructure. They build roads, they build train lines, they build the network, they build, in our modern context, they would build the telecommunications, they would build the energy infrastructure. They put all the things in place which the private market can then use and utilize to build the wealth of a nation. And then what the government also does is it protects that ecosystem from outside interference by saying, if you want to trade in the system, you need to pay a price, because we're going to use that money, and that money which is paid into that system is a large part of what they would use to build that infrastructure. So you can lower taxes on your own private industry. Say, for example, I drive a Ford. Why do I drive a Ford? I love Fords. But Ford is an American company, obviously founded by Henry Ford, who was a very America First kind of guy. He loved his country. I think he's even the person who created the idea of a living wage for factory workers. But you take Ford Motor Company, right? If you allow Volkswagen, Volvo, all these other companies to just sell in America without having to pay a tax before they come in, that can undermine your own industrial base, which hurts your workers, but also it hurts your national security, because During World War II, what happened? Well, Ford and Chevy and Dodge and all these companies were then making military equipment for the United States to use in the war. So it's not just an industry first principle, it's a national security first principle. The idea of protecting your industry. And you're not saying to other markets you cannot sell in here. Like, for example, some Americans earn such good money, they want to drive a Lamborghini, they want to drive a Ferrari, they want to drive a high-end Mercedes, right? So those who want to do that have to pay for the privilege first by buying a luxury car, but those companies which sell there have to pay for the privilege to have access to that higher earning market. And then that money, which is paid on those tariffs, then goes back, is supposed to go back into building the infrastructure to help the American industry grow. And again, as I said before, lower taxes on American industry so that it can compete against the international markets. That's the whole idea of industrial capitalism. And I think that's basically the Hamiltonian system. Is that correct, Brad?
Basically, yes, it is. It would be economic independence, manufacturing independence, and to be free from that free trade, which you've just described very well, which really is a weapon. You know, the free trade can be used as a weapon, right? None of these systems are inherently evil of their own, but it's the heart. Evil runs through the heart of every person, so we tend toward that kind of when we get power. We want more. And the founders seem to understand that. So let me take it a bit farther here. I think it seems like the assumption in your argument is that Trump, and let's just say the administration, because it would have to be operating still as the military arm of that liberal international order, that rules-based international order, the post-war Anglo-American order.
Not necessarily. I think I'm not quite saying that, actually.
You're saying he's going his own way?
I'm saying there's a tug of war. I'm saying that there is an element that wants to go his own way, go America's way, and there's an element that wants to be used for imperial purposes while America still has the ability to do it. So there's this nexus of influences in the administration. And like, for example, there's the neocons. And when I say neocons, I mean American neoconservatives. Douglas Murray, who's a British man, has actually written a book on neoconservatism, The Case for Neoconservatism. So if people want to read up on what neoconservatism is. Douglas Murray is basically a globalist shill, I guess you could put it that way. He pushes it really hard. I'm not advocating Douglas Murray. I'm just saying if you want to understand what these people believe, there's a book you can look up, or you can look up some of his articles online. So there's this element in the United States which believes that they do exist for this liberal order. Then you've got a lot of these people will be Americans or maybe foreigners from different countries, but they believe that America is supposed to be the leader of the liberal world order. Then you've got this element, which is like the American first element, which is, no, we've got to restrain back. But then you've got elements, for example, and this might be a little bit controversial, so I'll try and say this carefully. People like to point out about how foreigners from other nations like to try and co-opt American influence, and they generally tend to pick on one particular little country. And I'm not going to do that here because that can cloud the discussion. I'm going to talk about another little country. And that little country that a lot of people won't think of is actually Cuba. Now, Cuba is obviously, it's been under heavy American sanctions for some time. And obviously, you can go back to the conflict, the way the Soviet Union was using Cuba to try and set up bases, to try and, be able to attack America in the same way that America was setting up bases in Eastern Europe. But what's happened is, because of the heavy American influence in seeking to curtail that effort, which is obviously rational. I'm not against that at all. I understand that. What's happened is you've had this massive wave of Cuban immigration into the United States, and some of the elites who were sort of more not on the side of the Castros and that, who fled the country, some of their children have now become influential in politics and are seeking to direct U.S. politics to sort of deal with problems which actually come from their own home country, which no longer really, Cuba's not really a problem in America. anymore. The Soviet Union doesn't really exist. It's not really the issue that it was in the past, but you've got these elements in the American government who are seeking to use their influence. And one of these influential people is Marco Rubio himself, who's one of the most powerful Americans in America right now. I believe, is he the Secretary of State? Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he's kind of had an axe to grind for his entire political career in seeking to do regime change in Cuba. So that's what I'm talking about. As I'm trying to point out here, this is not about one particular little nation in the Middle East, which everybody focuses on. This is a multifaceted thing. You've even got, and this is fascinating to me. Like, did you see recently? This was all over the alternative news sphere in Australia. Many YouTubers were talking about this. But how aware are you about what was going on in Minnesota with the Somalian daycare centers? Are you?
Oh yeah, very aware. It's right up in the top of the public consciousness here.
But what's interesting is that feeds all the way up, and people have made connections towards Somalians who are actually in Congress. And this is what I mean. When a nation is as powerful as the United States, people from all the places in the world which are affected by that nation will be attracted to the centers of the halls of power and seek to redirect those efforts of that hall of power. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean that's clearly a threat, clearly a problem that we would have that urge that still exists. I mean, it's Trump's first term was 2016, and he had 4 years, and we would say it's by God's grace that he actually, well, I wouldn't say didn't win. I would just say that he had 4 years off to go back and regroup and come in with what we believe is a strong strategy. And just to respond to Rubio, yeah, and Summer as well has voiced her concerns about Rubio's rhetoric here lately. But I would call our attention back to what the the address he gave at the Munich Security Conference, where he made it was J.D. Vance who went there last year and really rebuked him, raked him over the coals. And look, if we're not going to be ideologically aligned, we can't be allies. And then Trump goes to the United Nations and hammers them on, the green policies and the climate change stuff and immigration. And then this year, Davos, Trump hammers them again. But then Rubio at the Munich Security Conference goes there and gives, at the time, was a really encouraging statement which I'm trying to find the quote again.
I know the speech you're talking about, and that's while you're finding that quote, that's the one where he talks about how we're no longer going to be providing security for the European people.
Well, he basically repeats what you find in the national security strategy, which is, look, we're not going to be the keepers of we're not going to play a role anymore in this managed decline of our own nation through these policies and through Europe benefiting from us as the military arm of that rules-based international order. I guess to the response, do you think it's? I'm sure you think it's possible, but what I'm seeing is that the events you're describing could be interpreted just as easily as a strategic realignment, rather than bouncing back and forth from. So I guess the part of the argument that I have trouble with is that. Is it Trump that you're saying seems to be going both ways? That he doesn't seem to be intent on anti-imperialism?
I think actually. So you live in America. You've got a much better insight into the American political system than I do. So I don't want to oversell my the strength of my position.
Well, feel free to go as far as you like. You're in safe territory here.
Yeah, I just want to say to the people listening to this, I don't consider myself an expert on some of this stuff. I consider myself quite well informed on the way empire works because it crosses over with my historical studies. And that's kind of why when I write about this, I tend to focus on that sort of stuff because I know that stuff really well.
Yeah.
But my general assessment of the way Trump is coming across is I think he really loves America. I think he also really loves the fact that America is number one. And I think he wants America to stay number one. But I think the national security strategy is written by people who recognize that staying number one is not sustainable. And so I suspect there's a bit of a tug of war, perhaps within the White House itself, and maybe in Trump. I don't know the man personally, obviously, but there seems to be like this bit of a pull between we are number one, so we should get to dictate this policy, but we also recognize it's no longer sustainable. And every nation, like if I was you, Brad, or any American, I'd be so upset at the way that your country has been hollowed out from the inside. Like that's
mainly our primary argument is that's what's occurred, and that's what we believe would be corrected, a necessary correction.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you can see signs of that happening, I understand why you like that. I've seen some of the same signs. We've already talked about them in some of this. Any policy which restores back to the American man the ability to have a factory job or an industry job or a production job and build something which he knows is American and that his kids can buy, that his neighbors can buy, is really a good thing. I want to see the same thing in my country. It actually really upsets me. I drive a Ford. One of the reasons I drive a Ford is because in Australia, we had two main manufacturers. We had Ford and Holden, and we also made some Toyota and Japanese stuff here. But our Australian companies were Ford and Holden. And even though they're both American companies, really, Ford is started by America. And Holden in Australia was General Motors Holden. So it was actually owned by the same company who owned Chevy in the United States. It was the Holden brand was actually started in South Australia in the 19th century. And they started by making saddles for horses and stuff like that, leather products. And then they kind of went to making car products in the 20th century. And then they kind of got bought out by General Motors. In other words, I drive an Aussie car because I love the fact that it was made in this country by Australians, for Australian conditions. And it's over 20 years old now, my car. It's not a new car, but it is still brilliant. And I'll get in that car with people and they'll come for a drive. They're like, wow, this car's a lot nicer than I expected. I'm like, that's because we've actually been trained in this country to see Australian stuff as inferior and foreign stuff as superior. And that's part of the same thing which happened to your own nation. And so when I see policies put forward by the Trump administration, which basically say to other countries, you have to pay for the privilege to sell in our markets, I think that's a really good thing. What I also see is there's this sort of like this globalist influence, which is like, okay, you Americans have your thing, but only if we get to have our use of the U.S. military as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's right on point.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's sort of what I'm critiquing, and I kind of see that tug of war in the Trump administration. There's this element where I think Americans, and I understand this because as Australians, we had to go through this as well in our own history. We were British. Australia is British. In fact, up until I think 1984, which is the year I was born, Australian Parliament was still subservient to the British Parliament. I believe that was the year. And it was around about that time, maybe just before, where every Australian citizen who was born had British citizenship. So it wasn't that long ago. And the British Empire ruled the seas, rule Britannia, the nation that ruled slaves. Have you ever heard that song?
Yes.
Yeah. So we have this view of ourselves as part of the dominant power of the world. But in my lifetime, I've had to watch Australians readjust to the fact that we're just a minor nation in a minor part of the world, no longer part of the dominant force. And a lot of Australians are struggling with that realignment. And I think I see that in the American administration. There's this tension between, we were number one for so long, but now we cannot maintain that. So how do we readjust? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see that. So that, I mean, we see the same, in that sense, we're really seeing the same thing, because Trump is battling against those exact forces inside his own government. So where the Bush era doctrine, rules-based international order, in H.W. Bush, Daddy Bush, we call him here, he was, he was so clear to state that that this new world order is going to be a rules-based order where the United Nations has authority and is strong and respected. But that doctrine, right through those particular years, assumed that America should remake societies in our image. Trump's foreign policy is not that at all. You can see it in the strategy where let me just read that part, because that's.
Which page is it?
If it's right from the PDF, it should be. We can just go on page 9. It's in that section. What do we want from the world? So they've just stated their goals, which is a lot. I've already said most of that. So we want to ensure the Western Hemisphere remains reasonably stable. So the main focus should be the Western Hemisphere. That's why they call it the Donroe Doctrine. But we haven't quite got there yet, so we've got to heal these other problems first. We want to halt and reverse the ongoing damage that foreign actors inflict on the American economy while keeping the Indo-Pacific free and open, preserving freedom of navigation in all crucial sea lanes, which is interesting right now, and maintaining secure and reliable supply chains and access to critical materials. Support our allies in preserving the freedom and security of Europe while restoring Europe's civilizational self-confidence and Western identity. And that's really just about our common heritage. And as Rubio stated in Munich, it's our common Christian heritage. Prevent an adversarial power from dominating the Middle East and its oil and gas pipelines, these choke points basically through which they pass. And this being the origin of the forever wars that a lot of Trump's critics today say that he's partaking in. But as we say, if Trump is successful in what he's doing in Iran, the whole impetus for those forever wars and being bogged down in the Middle East would be over. We wouldn't need to have 300 bases in the Middle East anymore. If we can get rid of this one big problem that's over there right now, which has in our opinion, based on evidence that we found, has really been a proxy of that rules-based international order, or that City of London influence that keeps the area destabilized for many purposes, most of them being to keep control over energy flows in the world. But go ahead. Did you add something?
Do you? Because I would see Israel as more destabilizing element in the region, although I believe Iran is sort of like a counterbalance, and what I mean by that is it is also involved in that destabilization, but it's because these two nations sort of fight each other through their proxies. And Iran and Israel kind of act as a smaller version of like the Soviet Union and the Americans. Remember, like during the Soviet era, they would fight each other through different countries. That appears to me the way that Iran and Israel kind of work. They're both like, I would see them. Okay, maybe the fairest way to put it is they're both a destabilizing element in their region. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Well, I think that's right on the money. So what we would say to that is, we deal with the claim here a lot that Israel controls Trump, or Israel controls our government. Well, if you can go back 250 years and find out who the influence that never wanted us to become a nation to begin with, and from the moment we became a nation, after the hot war was won, our founders even wrote about it. Okay, now the hard work begins of keeping ourselves independent economically from that free trade system, which is, as you explained earlier, is about economic dumping, right? When you've got a manufacturing nation that's a powerful manufacturing nation that's getting its resources from its colonies or wherever else, it has the power to dominate those economies in those colonies or other nations through bringing those resources in, manufacturing products, and then selling them back to those colonies or nations at whatever price they want. Or you could do like China, and you could just dump products on that nation and run their economy into the dirt, run their minimum wage down. This is specifically, I mean, almost word for word what's mentioned in the strategy as the economic part of this. So again, it was that Bush era doctrine that assumed we should go around the world remaking society as in our image, and that's how we would project our strength. But the policies go ahead.
So in your view, the US was seeking to break the the regime of Iran, and effectively by breaking that center of power, doing something similar to Venezuela. If that's the case, if that was their goal, I would say that it's probably really badly failed, because the regime has kind of stayed in place. It's interesting because some experts have said that the US is going to put troops on the ground. I actually think there's evidence that troops have been on the ground, but maybe not in large numbers. There's obviously definitely special forces and stuff on the ground. But by seeking to take out Iran, they're seeking to weaken one of the centers of gravity of that City of London system, that financialized system. But wouldn't you see like the United Arab Emirates and those other Arabian powers as a much more powerful element of that City of London presence? Wouldn't you agree, or am I reading that wrong?
No, I don't. No, well, you look at Saudi Arabia, for example. That monarchy there has been pretty much kept in power by the. I'm more comfortable calling it the globalist system, but it is that because the City of London is now an ideology. It doesn't really have a head that you can go decapitate anymore. It's everywhere. It's metastasized like a disease.
Can I just build on that? That's a really good point. And that was the other thing I wanted to say, but I kind of forgot it while I was mentioning the other thing. Like you said before, if I heard you correctly, that you keep hearing in the American media that Trump is controlled by Netanyahu or by Israel.
Oh, that was I was just going to say that who was it that Sykes-Picot who put Israel in that spot to begin with?
It was the British. It was the British,
along with America. I mean, we were working right with them for a long time. So to set up this situation where you would have the opportunity for destabilization, it would just manifest itself. So anyway, go ahead.
I was going to address that. So the reason that happens, in my assessment, because the influence of the Israel lobby in America is very strong. I mean, John Mearsheimer has written it, but people mistake that, and I have to be very careful talking about this in my country because our country has very different speech rules to your country. But what I'm going to say is not really that controversial. A lot of people mistake that by thinking that it's all a Jewish thing, but no, a lot of the Israel lobby in the United States is actually an evangelical thing, and it has been for about a century. So that Christian Zionist influence is as prominent, maybe even more prominent. And if that foreign influence comes in, it works together with that, and together they make each other more powerful. But part of the problem, what's going on here in my assessment, is people think of the globalists as this uniform body of like people in agreement who are trying to rule the world. But I do not believe that is the case. I believe that it's really,
I would agree,
these different elements, there's these different forces that they're fighting each other as well as fighting against the sovereignty of nations. They don't always agree. They're not always on the same policy. They're not always working together. In fact, I don't want to go too far down the theological route because it can become very complicated. I actually believe Revelation 17 teaches this, because it talks about the 10 kings who are the power behind the scene, and then they give their power to the beast, and then he rules the world for the last hour, that short time. And this is sort of like a future thing, or it might be a past thing. People debate about that. But my point is, there's different rulers. They're not necessarily in agreement. And so what happens is people try to blame one particular group for all the things which are happening, but that's just not an accurate assessment of what's going on. There's different factions led by different families or different influences or different political influences, and one will be dominant in one place, one will be dominant in another place, and they compete against each other. And that is, I think that's a more accurate assessment of the globalists. And you said you agree with that? Do you?
No doubt. Yeah, that's one of the main problems, is that there's no one leader to take out. This free trade ideology, this financialization system, which pulls value away from manufacturing and real products and puts it in markets. You follow this right back to Rothschilds. I mean, I'm talking about the old Rothschild. I'm talking about Meyer Amschel and then Nathan Rothschild. But those are just the names we know. We've got the Pilgrim Society there in Britain at the time. So when we talk about this, we're not trying to identify, well, it's just the British. It's the ideology from that's hundreds and hundreds of years. And as you said, families in America, you'd be talking about Rockefellers, Carnegie's, the J.P. Morgan, and others. The Bush family has a lineage right back through all of that, funding both sides of wars. This is the model. And
the Kennedy.
So I agree with you completely on that. I see it the same way, and that's the difficulty in now. As you said in the article, you believe that system is already rupturing or winding down. And apparently, obviously, with the control of wealth, which controls which brings power, it's going to be difficult to root this out everywhere. So you have to find its main chess piece. Venezuela was one. Venezuela represented the international hub for narco trafficking globally. It was an easy place for enemies of America to come in and get Venezuelan credentials. We had no travel restrictions with Venezuela, so they could just fly right in or travel right into the country, and under false names, under Venezuelan credentials, could be from wherever. So that was, there's a lot more to say. We've written a couple of articles on that go into more detail. But that would be the first piece, because it's right here in our region, and we've had millions of deaths from the flood of not really drugs, but poisons meant to kill people that have come across the border in the past several years. So Venezuela was like a disruptive pawn. But then you've got Iran, who's sitting there like this knight who's more difficult, just like you said in the article, a much harder nut to crack because of all of the implications and all of the network that's involved there. Iran has its own. I mean, I'm going into some speculation here, but I have a reason to say it. They have their own deep state right there in Iran. They have their own forces that are working. You can see that now. They don't really know who's negotiating. You get one message one day and another one the next. So it's difficult. It's difficult to stop or take that piece off the board just because of 50 years worth of embedding, and the way that this regime was set up. Of course, you've got British and you've got Americans involved in that as well. It's going to take some time to get that taken down. Now, the military action on Iran is still pretty new. I mean, if you look at it in comparison to the global war on terrorism, for example, I mean, it's still new, and I have confidence that the president wants to get that wrapped up as quickly as possible. I don't, I've had it on the screen here for a little bit, the Middle East, the strategy in the Middle East. And let me just read through that, because I also want to get to the point you made about Euro-Asia. But for the Middle East first, we'll wrap that one up. Shift burdens and build peace. Let me go full screen here. This would be, Matthew, this would be page 31. It's section D on regions.
Yep.
For half a century at least, American foreign policy has prioritized the Middle East above all other regions. The reasons are obvious. The Middle East was for decades the world's most important supplier of energy, was a prime theater of superpower competition, was rife with conflict that threatened to spill into the wider world and even to our own shores. Now, the administration doesn't get into identifying the actual players involved there as much as we would like, but we do believe that that's because they would like to be able to work with these people after this is settled. But anyway, then it goes on to say, today, at least two of those dynamics no longer hold. Energy supplies have diversified greatly, with the United States once again a net energy exporter. So we really have Iran's oil isn't going to hurt us. But there's a bigger problem. Superpower competition has given way to great power jockeying, in which the United States retains the most enviable position, reinforced by President Trump's successful revitalization of alliances in the Gulf. So you mentioned with other Arab partners and Israel. So this goes to the Abraham Accords. Matthew, one of the things that we see about this that's really amazing, that I haven't seen in my lifetime, is in this military operation on Iran, you've seen Gulf states and Israel and the United States working as allies in this particular operation. I mean, we haven't seen that kind of cooperation in a while. Now, that's a claim. You can tell me where I'm wrong on that if you want, but let me finish this little piece here. Conflict remains in the Middle East most troublesome dynamic, but there is today less to this problem than headlines might lead one to believe. Okay, he talks about Iran as the chief destabilizing force, but that it's been greatly weakened through recent military operations. We've got the Israel-Palestinian conflict, which is still thorny. But Trump did achieve a ceasefire and release of hostages. Now, this is the big point here. This is really the point I wanted to get to. This comment here. As this administration rescinds or eases restrictive energy policies, now that means on the Middle East, that means on Iran. So in order to do that, we've got to get somebody in there that we can work with that wants to be a legitimate participant in their regional economy. And as American energy production ramps up, which it has, America's historic reason for focusing on the Middle East will recede. Instead, the region will increasingly become a source and destination of, investment, and they'll be a participant rather than a source of destabilization. I meant to put that on the screen. Sorry about that. I didn't put that up there. All right, we can also work with...
I've got it here.
We can work with Middle East partners to advance our other economic interests, from securing supply chains to bolstering opportunities to develop friendly and open markets in other parts of the world, such as Africa, which they go on to talk about later. And here, Middle East partners are demonstrating their commitment to combating radicalism. That would be Iran, primarily, a trendline American policy should continue to encourage. But that will require dropping America's misguided experiment with hectoring these nations. That would be the rules-based international order, especially the Gulf monarchies, into abandoning their traditions and historic forms of government. We should encourage and applaud reform when and where it emerges organically without trying to impose it from without. So the key to successful relations in the Middle East is accepting the region and its leaders and its nations as they are, while working together on areas of common interest. Now, it goes on to qualify that you can't allow that. It says here, America will always have core interest in ensuring that the Gulf energy supplies don't fall into the hands of an outright enemy. Those who shout death to America on a regular basis, and that the Strait of Hormuz remains open and the Red Sea remains navigable, that the region not be an incubator or exporter of terror against American interests or the American homeland, and that Israel remains secure. So we can and must address this threat ideologically as well as militarily without decades of fruitless nation building. And we have a clear interest in expanding the Abraham Accords. Yeah, go ahead.
And so this is where the strategy document. This is where we get into the parts where I don't think are as solid as some of the earlier parts. And this is, I mentioned this. I touch on this very briefly in the article. I touched on it very briefly. I noticed the US's intricate relationship with Israel, which makes it harder for the US to act completely in its own interests. Though I suspect this relationship has been strained by this conflict. So I will admit this is a superior strategy than what we've seen in the past. The Roman Empire engaged in a form of nation building, but what they would do, say you've got the Gallic Wars with Caesar against the Gauls, which is the region we now call France. He went in there, and he actually went in there against the wishes of much of the power base in Rome, and absolutely pacified the Gauls. The Gauls were considered one of the ancient terrors of the Romans. They were terrified of starting this war, terrified of the results. But what happened is, like, you go there a century or so after Caesar had been there, and they were basically Roman. They were Roman in outlook, Roman in language, Roman. And so what they would do is they would go in there, they would absolutely decimate a nation militarily. They wouldn't get rid of all the fighting men. They would actually incorporate those fighting men into the legions, and then they would stay. And then over time, they would just systematically crush all opposition to that Romanization process. And it got to the point where the Gauls didn't want to not be Roman. They wanted to be Roman. They considered themselves that. Whereas what America has done under Bush is it's gone in there with sort of a military presence, no social presence, and no determination to stay for the century or more that it would take to turn, say, Iraq into a version of America. It's just, you can't do that with a military. You need to do it with an entire social structure. And so what this strategy document is recognized is that is a fool's errand. It is a foolish process. It is just a money wasting. It creates unnecessary drain on the American economy. It creates an unnecessary toll on the American soldier. It creates an unnecessary toll on the American society. And so they've identified that this is a serious problem. We don't want to go down that route. So I will grant to you that this is a superior outlook than the one which was offered in the past, and that there is a change. I don't disagree with that. But the core part of this problem, and there's just one sentence which outlines why this strategy is still a problem, and it's actually it's page 32, if you're looking at PDF, 27 written on the actual paper itself. Superpower competition has given way to great power jockeying, in which the United States retains the most enviable position, reinforced by President Trump's successful revitalization of our alliances in the Gulf with other Arab partners and with Israel. In fact, that's actually the sentence I wanted to read. It mentions it. Where does it? Here we go. Sorry, it's the wrong sentence. It's down the bottom of that page. America will always have core interest in ensuring the Gulf energy supplies do not fall into the hands of an outright enemy. So this is imperialism. We have interests in seeking to control the resources of other nations. That the Strait of Hormuz remains open. The Strait of Hormuz was open. There was no possibility of it being closed until this military.
Do you think that's arguable, though? Do you think it's arguable that the strait was legitimately open, or that it was forever possibly squeezed? What the argument we're saying is that let's remove that possibility altogether. With a short-term pain, we could free that thing up so that what we're saying, that this actual imperial power won't be playing that game with it anymore. But there will always, the problem is Iran is such a powerful country historically, whether it's got City of London influences or not, it will always have dominance over that little area because of the nature of the power of that nation. Well, that's what I think. That's what the administration is saying is what we don't want to control your resources. What we would like is for you to be a participant in your region's economy in a legitimate way.
So I hadn't finished where I was summarizing this. So
Okay,
I understand why you jumped in there, but I'm going to go in a different direction than what you might have anticipated. That the Red Sea remain navigable, that the region not be an incubator or exporter of terror against American interests or the American homeland, and that Israel remain secure. See that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words is what will bring down this whole strategy. Because what's going on here is America is not just acting in its own interests, it's its own interest plus. Now, this is important. Any nation which ties its foreign policy to the survival of another nation which is not its own is not going to be able to act in its own interests. This is going to be quite controversial to a lot of people out there. But America has more interest in being allied with all of the Muslim powers in the Middle East rather than with Israel, because Israel is not an energy producing country. It's not a powerful country in its own right. It has a very powerful military because it's been provided with that since its founding. That's part of something the British set up and the Soviets, and then the Americans took that over. It has been made artificially strong, but it doesn't have a lot of resources. In fact, the gas resources that it does have actually mostly exist under Gaza, which is another reason for the Gazan war. There's gas resources and oil resources off that coast, which the Israelis understandably would like to have control over. But if you tie your foreign policy to that nation in the Middle East, that is going to continually put you at odds with the other nations in the Middle East. And that's why I argue that what's going on in Iran is even if they are trying to take down the city of London, those efforts are being hampered by the fact that they're not just trying to take down the city of London, they're trying to do it in such a way that preserves their influence in and with Israel, which is just not going to work out. So Israel are not going to, in my assessment, I could be wrong about this, but from what I can see about Israeli foreign policy, they are not going to feel secure and safe in their own outlook of their region until every powerful nation in that region has been balkanized and is no longer able to go toe-to-toe with it militarily. And if for America to actually work alongside Iran would have to agree to be subservient as the lesser power in that region. And the Iranians are not going to be okay with that because historically speaking, they have been the dominant people in that region for millennia, not just centuries, for millennia, like going back into Bible times. They're one of the most ancient peoples in the world. So for a young upstart nation like the United States to say to Iran, now look, I'm not saying Iran are the good guys. Please, people who are listening to this, don't misunderstand me.
People will say that, yeah.
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is when America has its foreign policy tied to any other nation in any region, that hampers its abilities to work in its own interest. America is a net exporter, especially since it started fracking. America is almost completely energy independent and almost completely resource independent. It actually doesn't need to be involved in the Middle East in the way that it is, but the reason it is because of that statement and that Israel remains secure. And
I think I can explain that for you. I mean, I think I can. And first of all, I want to say that I agree with you. And we are not Christian Zionists here. We've offered quite a few criticisms of that particular flavor. But consider this. What the strategy is saying, in my opinion, and I believe that the actions so far have supported this, and that the ultimate goal is not to forever be involved as Israel's guarantor. The goal of the strategy is to remove the problems. Let's let's just call it the bully on the block, and Israel also being a bully on the block. But here's the thing. When we talk about Israel, of course, we're talking about the government that's in there, okay? The people there, different story. They might tend to agree with some of what I'm about to say, and what you said as well. Here's the thing. Israel, the government, Netanyahu, have benefited from this state of destabilization for decades, since their founding. And so because as long as there is that threat, they are justified in coming to the United States and asking for billions and billions of dollars. And of course, the administrations past have been, happy or not, they've done it.
Yeah.
So if Netanyahu would probably just rather have that threat remain, because that's what keeps them going, is that threat. What the administration is working for is to remove that threat so that Israel doesn't have that reason to keep coming and calling that way. And if that's successful, again, supporting other nations' own sovereignty, then you would see the need for Israel to have a constant American military presence, or this new special relationship, as you mentioned, decline. I mean, it's what this section of the strategy says. As we pull out of this region, Israel would become stable. That's one way that we can help secure Israel's stability, is to get this stabilized and get our people out of there. Now, the way that works out, who knows? Who knows? But it appears to me that the strategy is trying to solve that problem, which is unlike the ones before it.
You know, I understand. That's actually an interesting perspective to have. In other words, if we can solve this problem, then we can extract ourselves.
They want alliances in the region. Again, who knows, Matthew, whether that can work out? But it seems to be the goal.
I actually think stability in the region. Some of my Christian friends might not like hearing this, but I think stability in the region will be much more secure if there are counterbalancing powers rather than if there is one dominant power. If there's one dominant power, that they tend to suppress other nations, and that causes elements for revolution. In fact, that happened in the Western Hemisphere. America was such a dominant power that the Soviet Union was able to sort of subvert a lot of the South American nations and turn them into hotspots of revolutions, which caused a lot of problems for the United States, partly because America in its dominance actually kind of kept those other nations sort of under its thumb a little bit too much, if that makes sense. I can understand why a country wants to be dominant in its region, though. I understand Australia wants to be dominant in its region. Our government talks about that. It's part of the reason they instituted that $600 million for a football team in a foreign country. Anyway, my point is, I can understand that perspective you're coming from, and it is interesting to think that if the US can solve the Iran issue, then Israel can breathe a sigh of relief and the nation can breathe a sigh of relief. But I think that their goal is not just for peace. I think their goal is for expansion. And I think as long as their goal is for expansion, the other nations are going to be unsettled by that. That's just the nature of having an expansionary power in your region. Let's put aside ethnicities, nationalities, religious identifications. It's just from a military strategic perspective, if you're in a region and you've got ancient peoples in that region, and this new force comes into the region with an expansionary goal, that's going to cause conflict. And I actually accept your analysis as a possibility. And in fact, it's quite rational for American strategists to have that position. It's actually quite a rational position. If we can solve this, then we can extract ourselves and we no longer have to be so invested. The problem is, I think it's beyond the ability for the US to solve. And I think the limits of US power have been actually displayed by this war. For example, the aircraft carriers have had to either retreat or move far out of range because of the range of Iranian missiles, the land bridges which are being set up, the inability to put troops into the region. All of these things might have been the strategy, but I think what's actually happened as a result of this war is that US power has actually been shown to be not as strong as people thought it was. And so I think that might have exacerbated the problem in the region, but it might also, ironically, and this is what I'm going to say in support of you, it might also actually achieve the US goals of extracting itself from the region, because now it's going to be forced to extract from the region, which means you end up in the same position you were pointing out anyway. Does that make sense?
Yes. No, it does.
It was a bit of a complicated answer.
No, my point just flew out of my mesh like noggin. No, oh gosh. Anyway, I'll read this and then maybe it'll come back to me. We were talking about how that's terrible. I was going to say this. The way I see, we're just analyzing what's happened militarily in Iran from a different perspective. What I'm seeing is, I believe that Trump has actually shown some restraint. I know that that's not going to sound reasonable at first take, but I hear
what you're saying. I can understand why you're saying that.
I like to. There are a few old sage men that I like to go and check out every now and then, just to see if my thinking is anywhere near theirs. Got old guys that you trust. Victor Davis Hanson is one of them. And, he broke it down one day, the stated objectives of military objectives, whether they had been met and whether you could consider it a success. And I think the big problem with looking at Iran from the outside, which both of us really are, is that there's in a military conflict or in a war, there's really two ways to look at it. You have military objectives, whether they're met or not, and if they are, it's a victory. And then you have the political opinion as to whether or not it was popular, as to whether or not it was a victory in that sense or not. And I think in the political sense, the criticism is obviously going to be that they're bogged down, and that Trump is lost. He doesn't know what to do next and all. And the other perspective would be, which I think there's a lot of merit to, is that he's actually shown quite a bit of restraint, not so much in his rhetoric, but in the actions. I mean, he's dealing with them in his rhetoric in a way so that they're not sure what's coming next, which is probably effective. But anyway, that's really the point. Is I would just say that I believe that we've probably shown restraint there. It could still be. I pray it's not, but it could be much worse. I don't think anything nuclear is really on the table for us. But I think we've just used enough to get what we needed to get done here, because what's going on now is not necessarily working against Trump. It does politically, but in the overall objectives, it's not really working against us. In fact, in many ways, it works for Trump's agenda, if you see that agenda as breaking down that stranglehold over that particular choke point. And if it takes a little bit of time, of course, as the strategy says, we do not want to be bogged down. We don't want to be in protracted conflicts. But if we're going to achieve these goals, we have to get this particular chess piece out of the way, so that it's not affecting the entire region, and then by extension into our interest.
I think I hear what you're saying. My assessment will be a little bit different. I think part of the problem with this, one of the reasons why this nut is so hard to crack, and it's actually a three-way problem. So, for example, I'll explain what I mean. Trump has to show restraint. There's certain things he cannot do, because even though Iran has been hit pretty hard, they still have the ability to take out the energy production in the region. They could cripple the energy production in the region for years to come. And so Trump can't afford to go so far as to provoke that. Now, Iran has the ability to limit the US because it can attack Israel. However, if it attacks Israel too far, then Israel has the Samson option. So Iran also can't go too far in responding to Israel because it's counterbalanced by Israel's ability to respond. And then Israel itself, it's got the ability to do serious damage, and it showed it, but at one point it hit some pretty prominent gas fields. And I remember Trump publicly saying how upset he was about it and called for restraint. So basically, in other words, what I'm arguing is all three nations have shown that they're able to really hurt each other, but they're also all limited by the fact that if they do the maximum damage to each other that they can, the other nations can respond in such a way that they kind of really irreversibly destroy. America will be fine because it's on the other side of the world, but it'll cause if Iran were to use its version of the nuclear option, which is to take out the energy infrastructure in the region, that would so damage the world economy that it would affect America. America would be probably one of the nations which came out the best, but it would still be severely hurt by that. And the whole rest of the world. In other words, I would say that the situation has got itself into a bit of so much a quagmire as a sort of a stalemate, where all three sides, and you could add in the Arab powers as another side, but they're really part of the US coalition. But the three main players are Israel, US, and Iran, and all three have the ability to severely hurt themselves. But for all three, it's kind of like a civilization fracturing event, if that makes sense. And so the US has had to be restrained. And so in that sense, I would argue that what's happened is, at best, there's sort of a stalemate in the region. At worst, what it's done is it's shown that the US power is limited. Iran is able to resist it. And now we've got a situation where Iran and Israel are going to be in a cold war because they both have the ability to severely hurt each other now. And both are going to have good reason to not want to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's perfectly reasonable. Yeah, I mean, and of course, obviously, we're both just offering analysis and trying to speculate on what may or may not happen, and of course, we pray that it does. You know, I think
if your analysis is right, as I said to I've got good friends who see the situation exactly the same as you, and as I said to one of them, I'll say this: if you're right, by November, we'll be paying less for fuel and less for everything else. And so I'm not going to be upset if your analysis is correct.
Yeah, and that's what we're praying for. Also, this is one of the reasons why we're so we're really trying to get more people to read what the strategy says, because instead of just listening to social media or influencers or even us, just go read it for yourself and make your own conclusions. By the way, we're at about. Well, we're at 2 hours. How are you doing on time? Do you need to cut out of here?
Yeah, I should probably finish up pretty quickly because I was only planning to go for 90 minutes. So
okay, we could do this for hours, I'm sure. I've got a little section here. I'll finish up with the audience. I was going to go over some of the gains. I want to make sure I get that into the video, and we'll put this up on Substack as well. If you want a version of it too, just let Summer know, and we'll send you one as well. But go ahead and I want to make sure people know what you've written, which we started out with, of course, which is this, Like a Roaring Lion. And we've done a show on, we've done a couple shows about this where we've looked at particular specific chapters of Like a Roaring Lion, how the evil one works to destroy you. Again, just an excellent chapter there on free trade and conspiracy theories, and so much more that you're going to want to have this book, because it gives you a sober, realistic, scripturally grounded view on where Satan is active right now. And I think, of course, we should always be aware of our own flesh. If Satan didn't exist, I think my flesh would be enough to corrupt me. But this book is excellent for that. And of course, there is Defending Conscience. I didn't even have it on the screen. Look at me. This is what happens when Summer is not here to keep me in line. There it is. And of course, Matthew's book, Defending Conscience, which was written in response, generally, I guess, in response to the COVID debacle. Let everybody know what you're working on and what. Just tell everybody where to find you and how they can get into your books and your writing.
Yeah, so Defending Conscience is, for those who love what Brad and Summer talk about here, I think you'd love that book, even beyond the COVID stuff, because we get into looking at how the Protestant movement really influenced biblical liberty and liberty of conscience in Western culture. And there's actually quite a detailed section there and on the influence on the American system and how that actually influenced the world system for good. It's one of the reasons why I said nothing I write or ever say has anything against America. I love what the core of the American nation is, what it was founded to be. I hate seeing it subverted. I love the fact that Brad and Summer are seeking to restore their nation and work against that subversion. I think it's really good because we're cousin nations. Australia and America, we're cousins. We come from the same Anglo-Saxon backgrounds. And in that book, that's one of the reasons why in that book, even though we were looking at the Australian situation, we learned there's so much good in the American history about how people defended conscience and liberty of conscience and also true liberty. What I mean by that is the right to live the life that God has called us to live. That's what true liberty is. It's not libertinism, do whatever you want. But the right to be able to have a family, have a business, be free from excessive government interference. America really showed the world how to do that better than any other. But there are roots of that in the English tradition and in the Baptist traditions. And so what that book really goes into show is, look at all these good things that Christians have done for Western society. Why are we moving away from this? And the COVID excess was an example of how the globalists were trying to crush that seed of Christian influence, which has really made the West the envy of the whole world. And we're basically trying to defend that and say, let's get back to that. And let's really defend this before we lose this. And that's something which I know Brad and Summer love doing on their channel. And so I think even if you're not really wanting to get into the COVID stuff, the rest of the stuff in that book you'll find really helpful on that issue. And so, like a roaring lion, I like to describe it like this. If you know what the Screwtape Letters is by C.S. Lewis, think of Like a Roaring Lion as the theology behind the Screwtape Letters and really getting into the strategies with which the devil has used to destroy humanity in different ways. And something people don't understand about the Old Testament or the New Testament is that the Old Testament law was actually a brilliant system that God created to actually undermine the devil's influence in a nation. And Israel was really set up in the Bible to actually be a counter strategy against the devil's influence through the false religions. And so there's lessons we can learn from the Bible about how the devil works to hurt nations and hurt people and hurt families, and how to actually work against that. My favorite chapter in the whole book, there's lots of chapters which people might find interesting. I really loved writing the free trade, the conspiracy, the devil likes to destroy through a conspiracy. I really loved talking about how he systems avert. But my favorite chapter myself in the whole book is a strategy to take down the devil in the home. And I wanted this book to be really practical and show how the devil has sought to pull apart the Christian family and how much that damages society. And so I really encourage people, if you want to understand many of the ways the devil has even convinced big segments of the church to go along with these strategies, check out this book, Like a Roaring Lion, because I seek to expose that in the book. You can follow my writings on Substack, Rev Matt's writings on Substack, or my blog, younggospelminister.blogspot.com, which I'm now 42, so the Young Gospel Minister is becoming a bit of a joke, but I've decided to keep that title there because I've had it for so long. And on that, I've been writing on that blog since 2013. You can find the bulk of my writings on there as well. So, and you can check out my YouTube channel, Based Christian History on YouTube, where I discuss all sorts of different issues as well. Cool. Oh, Are you still there, Brad? Okay, something's gone wrong with the live stream at the moment. I'll just check with Brad. Is all okay? All right. I'm not sure what's happening here. Brad was there just a second ago.
Okay, Matthew, do you hear me? You got me back. So
Yeah,
that was not you. That was apparently our connection that caused that problem. So I guess probably about a minute and a half there we were out. We are still streaming. It looks like. So anyway, you set up Like a Roaring Lion and Defending Conscience, and these books are very important for today. Everyone who watches this channel should have these books in your library, and I believe they're available also on Kindle as well. We have all of those versions. Is Defending Conscience on Kindle also?
Yeah, you can get them all on Kindle. It's the easiest way to buy them is on Amazon. You can order a physical version on Amazon or the Kindle version, whichever way you prefer. But yeah, I talked about the books and talked about the blog and the Substack while you dropped out there for a bit. But I did say the stream is still going, so it's all good.
Yeah, so Matthew is on, you can find him on Substack at Rev Matt's newsletter, which is also not loading, but that is RevMatthewLittlefield.substack.com. We'll have that link for you in the description under this video so you can get there easily with an interesting topic right there at the top. Of course, I didn't share that. Gosh, everything's falling apart here, but we're going to make it through. There it is. Nope, there it is. Okay, Matthew, sorry about the hiccups there at the end, but this was a lot of fun. And look, I'm sure we could maybe come back next time and we'll get to the second half of that article, because you were talking about Eurasia, and there's some interesting stuff there too regarding China and global economy. And there's an interesting point there that about how China came from a poor, undeveloped nation into a developed nation, and the system that was applied there to do that, and then come the communists. So maybe we can come back and talk about that again soon.
Yeah, I'd love to come back. It's really fun today, Brad. I always love chatting with you guys. So
yeah, we appreciate you coming on and doing this and helping me to polish up my skills with this particular argument, which clearly need more work. And but I do appreciate your all your work and your ministry, you know, as it pertains to especially online and what you offer, and encourage everyone who watches this channel to read and listen to Matthew Littlefield. Thank you, brother. I'm going to stay on here for a few minutes and go through this last section. We look forward to seeing you again very soon.
No problem. Catch you later.
God bless you, brother.
Bye.
All right. Okay, folks. So how I want to finish up here is I want to make sure that you see our Substack, because everything that you've heard here tonight, it has been written about in great detail. You have an archive right here. I wish I could make that look a little bit better. I think I can. Something like that. Summer has done hard work, very good work at providing an archive here for everything that I've tried to argue here tonight. She has written about in much greater detail with primary sources for you to refer to. And we were talking about it again today. Once again, you know, we find ourselves in a position where we're at least in the area that we operate within, and our peers, once again, we're by ourselves again. And it's not because that's what we seek to do. We're really just seeking the truth, and we're seeking to look to analyze these things through the Christian worldview, with Scripture as our foundation for everything. And what we're seeing happen is, as we described here tonight, is a return to the American system, a return to a recovery of the republic. And so what I want to finish up with you here tonight about is to just tell you a few of, or several of, the objective gains and that the administration has made, and also to warn you about black-pilled conservatives out there today. And that's the latest article that Summer has here. To all the black pillars who say, let's see if I can get the whole title on here. All the black pillars who say globalists and technocracy are winning. You're wrong. Political nihilism disguised as truth-telling. Now, specifically here, we're talking about podcasters and influencers who work in this space regularly. You want to know what the Trump administration is actually doing? You're not going to find that on social media. This is an excellent article here, The Hidden Shifts, Sovereignty, Globalism, Technocracy, and the Return of the American System. Something bigger than the headlines is happening, and most are missing it. Most of the people in our area of the internet, over here in our little corner, are either missing it or refusing to talk about it. They simply won't refer to the national security strategy, which we believe is one that honors God. I can tell you right here. I have a little write-up that I made for this particular show on this topic. Let me a second here because I have to search for everything. I don't have my normal setup. Yeah. So I want to go through some of the objective gains that we've seen. Let's see, it's right here. I'm not going to be able to find that piece, but this will be enough. As conservatives, as Christians, right, we should hold our own side accountable, and we should do it through legitimate criticism, primary sources. We should work to primary those who are working against the administration right now. If you legitimately believe that the administration is restoring the republic, then we should be involved in that. First of all, we should be involved in voting, but we can't just vote every 2 years or every 4 years and say we've done our part. We have to live it out, right? As Christians, we have to live our faith out, and what that requires us to do is to engage in these issues. A lot of what you're seeing from online today is this: black-pilled conservatives, or who are engaging in this nihilistic rhetoric. As Nick Freitas put it recently, it's demoralizing. There is an element on the right today who are demoralizing, they're counterproductive, and they're trying to demoralize you. They're trying to convince you not to be involved because the false America First movement, led by people like Tucker Carlson, and unfortunately a lot of people who are writing in our space as well, are unwilling to acknowledge the objective gains that the administration has achieved so far. Our goal should be an honest assessment. We should acknowledge failures, recognize victories. We should avoid blackpilling. We should avoid self-defeating pessimism. And we should pursue practical solutions. First of all, some of the concerns, right? Some of the criticisms of this administration. The federal spending debt, all right? National debt is up. It surpassed approximately 38 to 39 trillion in early 26. That's a $2 trillion increase over the previous year. Conservatives expected Republicans to significantly reduce spending and debt growth. Again, we would say, what are the reasons for this? And how much would it be worth to crush globalism and restore the republic? And a criticism is, you'll hear from many critics of Trump, particularly, are also on the right today, is the expansion of executive power. Some are concerned that the president is getting too much authority. Some are even saying that there is an unexpected growth of centralized government mechanisms. The bureaucracy and spending cuts, right? The criticisms that promised federal spending cuts have not gone far enough, people would say. Again, it's been 1 year. Many conservatives believe the administration would avoid deeper foreign entanglements, right? So Iran, are you saying that Iran is just more of the same, or Trump is unable, that he's been captured by the neocons or the globalists? And people, they say this because their gas prices are too high, or there's just a fear, right? There's a fear of repeating the failures of the past. There's a perception that America first domestic priorities are being neglected. You'll hear frustrations that there haven't been enough prosecutions regarding the Epstein files or Russiagate. Again, folks, Pam Bondi was in there for 1 year, and it appears that her job was to clean up the Department of Justice so that you could bring indictments and make the cases stick so that you could actually prosecute people. And based on what Trump's tweets put out today, I'm sure we'll cover this later for you. What was it, like something like 70 posts in a 24-hour period from the past indicating that some of these arrests, some of these prosecutions, or at least indictments, could be upcoming, including Obama. I don't know. I'll believe that when I see it, but you have to be patient. Christians are called to be, patient, long-suffering. Some people say because the SAVE Act hasn't been passed yet, that the administration is failing. Again, you're just having to work against people in his own party with that, particularly the majority leader, Thune, he's just not willing to bring that to the floor for a vote. And one of the strangest arguments that I've seen lately comes from this book, which we'll be given a book report on this one for you. I don't know how soon, but it's coming. This is the book by Patrick Wood and Courtney Turner, The Final Betrayal, a cautionary tale, how technocracy destroyed America. Their argument is that Trump is establishing the control grid. He is establishing the technocracy. And one of their main arguments, one of the first arguments they make, of course, they say there is this dark enlightenment. That's the tech bros. That's Silicon Valley. They draw it all back to Peter Thiel, that he and the tech bros, through the dark enlightenment philosophy, are the ones who have the greatest influence over Trump. So what they're saying is, because the dark enlightenment, as they define it, is a philosophy that believes you should accelerate the collapse of America, of the government, of the system, so that you can create a new one. And that one of the first things the dark enlightenment tech bros say they would do when they got power was they would fire all the federal bureaucracy. Well, because Trump did that as one of his first acts, firing 33,000 federal employees almost immediately, and then tens of thousands of more of them later in the year. And that Doge, coming primarily from Musk, was the dark enlightenment getting into the administration and establishing technocracy through artificial intelligence and through the process of rooting out the waste, fraud, and abuse in the government. which is interesting because Wood and Turner also say they're constitutional originalists, or that they want to restore the republic. And over the last 50 years, our federal government has expanded and grown to be huge. So one of the first things you would think you would want to do to get back to closer to the original intention of the Constitution would be to reduce the size of the federal government, particularly because communist regimes always expand the federal government. Look at North Korea. Half the people in the nation are working for the government and somehow. So it just happens that their argument also seems to argue for bringing down the current system and establishing a new one of some kind. Anyway, this is a brief introduction to what we're going to get into there. I'll deal with Peter Thiel and all of that. So what has the administration done over the last year? That's good. What are some objective wins? Border security and immigration. Illegal border crossings dropped dramatically. The southwest border encounters with those trying to cross the border illegally fell from over 200,000 a month were coming in under the Biden administration. That's been reduced significantly. It's hard to get numbers on it, but immediately in the weeks after the inauguration, it dropped quickly, almost immediately, to 9,000 a month, which is still too much. But the operation is still underway. 2025 saw negative net migration for the first time in decades. Deportations and removals have significantly increased. Many people say it's not enough. But remember, some estimates were as many as 30 million people came in. So far, it's estimated that 1.9 to 2.2 million self-deportations have occurred, with hundreds of thousands of the more direct deportations happening. The estimations are, so far, roughly 2.5 to 3 million illegals have been removed from America within less than 2 years. There's been a sharp decline in fentanyl trafficking across the border. And what about energy? U.S. crude oil production is at record levels. 13.6 million barrels per day are going out, or were going out at the end of 2025. It's even more now. The federal regulatory burden has been reduced substantially with DOGE going in and shutting down, defunding, and essentially shutting down USAID, the National Endowment for Democracy. Now, all these were radical left extensions of policy in other nations, within our own nation. Federal Register pages report that the size of the federal government has been reduced approximately 43%. Drill, baby, drill, right? We're not, because we've rejected the climate policies, we're drilling for our own energy again. So domestic energy production and exports have increased massively. You don't see the effects of these things immediately. Special operations in Venezuela several months ago, arresting Maduro, was a major strategic victory for our region. And that's because Venezuela shifted its alliances away from China and Russia, other hostile regional actors too. In other words, traditional enemies of the U.S. And because Venezuela possesses more oil than any other place on earth, we've seen benefits from that. And so have the people of Venezuela, who once again are benefiting from their oil reserves. One big beautiful bill, which I personally criticized harshly here because of its omnibus structure, where you had all of these hundreds of bills within it. But it has led to objective gains, large tax cuts. We paid 30% less in taxes this year. That's significant. No tax on tips, right? The old administration wanted to take tips away from servers, anyone who is in that kind of service industry who really survives on their tips. There shouldn't be taxes on that. So that's back. Employers are not allowed to tax on overtime, in not everywhere, but in many areas now too. We've seen expanded child tax credits, and our GDP, gross domestic product, how much we produce that brings prosperity to us, has grown, has strengthened in the last quarter of 2025. These numbers will become more clear as we get through the rest of this year. You need 2 full years to see the benefits of these things. Of course, there was reindustrialization, reshoring our manufacturing. Hundreds of billions of dollars reshored. Investments made back in America that has ended up in factories being built again, jobs, real jobs based in production. And that's because also of tariff strategy that Trump used. Protectionism is the policy. That is to protect the American worker first, protect our national security. And that's what the tariff strategy was aimed to do, to end unfair trade practices that controlled disintegration of our economy. Of course, in contradiction to what we hear from the critics, the bureaucracy has been reduced. That was an expansion of what's called Schedule F, which increased the president's authority over federal employees so they would be easier to fire. So far, over 200,000 federal employees have been removed. 200,000. Would you think we would need 200,000 to begin with? Those are just the ones that have been removed. And they've increased the level of accountability for these federal employees. The Supreme Court has been a net gain for the administration. Trump prevailed in most of the emergency docket rulings that they had come up in 2025. Major Supreme Court victories were limitations placed on nationwide injunctions against executive actions, freeing up the president to do a little more, which also caused a criticism. Restrictions on birthright citizenship, Supreme Court decided in favor of that. Transgender military ban. Again, the deportations and the authority to deport. Supreme Court ruled in the administration's favor on that. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of ending the protected status of illegal migrants. And the Supreme Court also ruled in favor of the administration's ability to defund some of these obviously anti-American organizations and to end some of the massive foreign aid that was going out of here, that was never getting to the people that it was supposed to be helping. Supreme Court upheld state bans on gender transition procedures for minors. That's objectively good. They ruled in favor of parental opt-outs from LGBTQ school curriculum, age verification laws for pornography websites. It's a big one right there. There's some states now where the purveyors or the producers of porn don't even make their websites available because they can't adhere to the new laws that require them to get age verification. So these are all major gains for parental rights and to preserve our culture, moving away from the leftist, the globalist, libertinism, back step by step closer to our Christian foundations. Conflict in Gaza was resolved. The hostages, living and dead, were returned. Cartels were designated as terrorist organizations, the ones that had been bringing in the fentanyl that's killed 1 million Americans. Declines in homicide over the past 15 months or so have been significant. I don't know the stats to determine whether this is a true statement or not, but the claims are that homicide is at a lower rate than it's been in decades. You can check that one out for yourself. Department of Justice has been mostly recovered from control of the radicals. We just saw recently the Southern Poverty Law Center indicted. Their stated purpose was to fight white supremacy and extremism in America. It turns out they were funding it. I think we all knew that was the case. But that's a real gain. I mean, that is huge. James Comey's been indicted. I think his trial is set to start on the 15th. A lot of other officials. It takes time for these things to come about. You can't just indict and arrest people the first week or even the first year. You have to build cases. First of all, they had to clean out the Department of Justice so that they could do these things. They had enemies all around inside the department. So when you look and you're listening to these ideas out from podcasts, if you're reading blogs, you'll find two categories on the right, basically. Two categories of demoralizers. One is the subversive, anti-constitutional right-wing elements, like some populist figures, rejecting constitutional conservatism, rejecting the founding principles, seeking to tear down institutions entirely. There's a difference between restoring the American Republic and wanting to destroy and rebuild America under some other system, which I'm arguing that Wood and Turner, that's the logical conclusion of their argument, is a new system. So the first category is subversive, anti-constitutional right-wing elements who want to tear it down and replace it with something else. And then, secondly, there are the perpetual black pill critics, which they fall into that as well. Nothing is ever good enough, right? They consistently focus on failure, disappointment, insufficiency, and doom, and that's the state of mind they want to keep you in. Nothing is ever good enough. Their content strategy, what they write and what they say, relies on fear, outrage, distrust, perpetual demoralization. You have nothing to be optimistic about they would like for you to believe. We're telling you the opposite. Many reasons to be optimistic today. It's really accountability versus nihilism. Accountability is necessary, and constructive criticism, which we're trying to give you here, should identify problems, propose practical solutions. It should motivate you to action, right? It should. Our goal is to wake you up and spur you to action. Endless doom posting is meant to demoralize you. It's meant to weaken the momentum of the conservative movement to begin with, of Christians in the public square. Meaningful reforms to our system take time. It requires litigation. It requires Congress to be on board, right? You have to, it's frustrating to watch the way Congress gets nothing done or very little. But in the past 12 to 15 months, they've achieved some things, but it was like pulling teeth. But what the national security strategy and what the Trump administration is trying to do is set up a foundation so that real institutional change can occur gradually. It's like a diesel engine. They're trying to establish it and get it moving, because once they get it moving and people realize what's happening, that there is a restoration of the republic underway, and people get behind it, it'll be impossible to stop. And that's why we're telling you, you must engage. Christian, you must engage in the public square. But just voting alone is not sufficient civic engagement, right? You should be involved, at least be aware of what's going on in your local government. You should go to your local town meetings or city meetings, county meetings if you have them. You should try to organize. You should pressure representatives, right, to fight for Christian principles. Because I can guarantee you that the other side is in there doing it. Participate locally. If you feel like that what's going on in the federal government and Iran is just too far away and too big for you, you've got a local government that is more immediately impactful on your life, and you should be aware of it. You should support practical reforms in your own local government. And so that we don't fall into the criticism that they offer, we should oppose accelerationism. Any kind of societal collapse narrative, any argument that calls for a revolutionary destruction of what we have, we get this from the right today. Anything that's calling for chaos or civil conflict, that is always a last resort. We want to emphasize to you preservation of the American system that was founded. Restoration over destruction. So we need to do better, recognizing genuine victories, objective gains. Stop listening to influencers. And when you listen to us, you should go check behind us. Look at the articles and find out where the arguments are coming from. Do your own reading. Read books. Remain honest about the failures that our side makes. And always avoid this self-defeating pessimism, this black-pilled type of conservatism. Support practical action. Be involved locally. Because messages like these that tell you Trump is establishing the technocracy, he's helping them to build the control grid and establish the technocracy, the new world order. Those narratives benefit the left. They benefit the globalists. They benefit outrage-driven incentives. That's all they care about. Clicks. Profiting from perpetual crisis narratives. Some of the people on our side of the fence find themselves in a hole. They've served their audiences black-pilled content for so long that if they stop doing it, perhaps they lose their audience. So I encourage you to go to armoroftruth.net. This will be one of your best archives for following these developments as they've come about over the last year. And when you look through here, you will see the development of our position over the time that we've been active on Substack. You can see it on YouTube, the development of our arguments over the past few years as we have worked very hard to remain faithful, seeking the truth, reporting things and analyzing events through the Christian worldview with Scripture as our final authority for you. We're not here. We're not here to enrich ourselves, because I can guarantee you that it's very difficult when you actually pursue the truth. It's difficult to grow into a large platform because you're not playing the game that everyone else plays. So that's why I encourage you, go to the Substack that Summer has built and provided. Something I'm very proud of her for doing, because it is an example of how you follow the evidence and you change your perspective when the truth requires it, which is just being faithful. And if you can support us, you should support your local church first, always. If you can support us, you need to know that you're the only reason that we can be here and do this. No one wants to sponsor us, that's for sure. Somehow we're very controversial. I guess the truth is just that way. But everyone will tell you they're seeking after the truth. Ultimately, it's up to you. It's up to you to determine what the truth is. And we invite you to come here, read this Substack, watch our videos, and challenge everything we say. Email us at hello@armoroftruth.net and let us know if you agree or disagree, or if you just want to show support. We really do find a great deal of encouragement from when we hear from you guys. All right, so this has been a long one. And that's about all for tonight. We hope you've enjoyed this discussion with Matthew Littlefield, one of our favorite, what would we call him, contributors to the online conversation, who we disagree with vehemently on a couple points. But hopefully we have been able to show you tonight that you can have a disagreement on a core principle of political doctrine and at the end remain loving brothers and sisters in Christ. That's how it should be. Don't follow the model of the black-pilled influencers and so-called conservative demoralizers. All right, my friends. Thank you for being with us here tonight. Summer and I will be back with you very soon for the regular Armor of Truth live show. God bless you.